You're listening to Finding Fortitude, a podcast that aims to help former athletes take good care of their minds and bodies through sustainable, evidence-based health habits. I'm your host, Dr. Tori Williams, a physical therapist, coach, and fellow former athlete who is ready to be part of the change in healthcare and who is on a mission to learn and share about all things health and well-being so that you can be equipped with the knowledge and tools to live your best life. As a reminder, nothing shared on this podcast should be considered medical advice. Let's get started. Hello there, and welcome back to this New Year's edition of Finding Fortitude. This episode is being pre-recorded right now, but by the time this is released, it will be 2024. So Happy New Year. And 2024 is an exciting year for lots of reasons, but especially because it is the year that I am getting married. In less than 6 months, I will be marrying my best friend, and he just so happens to also be a doctor of physical therapy. So I thought it might be a fun idea to bring him on the pod so he could help me kick things off for 2024. And I have a feeling we might end up doing this at the beginning of every year moving forward if he isn't too traumatized by this experience, and I can convince him and twist his arm into doing it again. So without further ado, please welcome to the podcast my fiancé, Joe McIntire. Hi, babe. Thanks for being here.
Hello. Hey, thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Is that what you're supposed to say in these?
Yeah, I kind of forced you, so you didn't really have a choice. But thank you for being here. This feels kind of funny because this is the first time I'm recording a podcast with someone in the same household. I won't say the same room. I originally was going to have this in the same room and then realized I was sorely lacking in the appropriate equipment to be able to do that. So this is especially funny because Joe and I are in the same apartment, but in different rooms recording this.
25 feet away.
So bear with us here. We are Zooming each other from the other room. God bless Zoom. So this should be fun. We're going to talk a little bit about you and your background, Joe, and talk a little bit about some things we're looking forward to in 2024. And then I've got some rapid fire questions that we can go over about the current state of physical therapy and our opinions about different things in the industry and health in general. So to start, do you mind telling listeners a little bit about yourself and your athletic background?
Absolutely. So as you mentioned before, I'm a doctor of physical therapy. I currently practice in East Sacramento in an outpatient orthopedic setting. I guess you could say I have a pretty traditional or common background as to how I got into physical therapy, but I was a former athlete, such as many of your clients and your people. Baseball was my biggest background. That's where I started when I was real young. But I played lots of baseball, some football through my Pop Warner days and high school days, a little bit of wrestling, and then I dabbled in a lot of recreation kind of across the board. But after high school baseball, I ended up going to junior college, Butte College, and played a couple of years of baseball there, from which I then transferred to Chico to continue my education. I stopped playing baseball at that point, and I started to kind of figure out where I was going to go with my life. And I originally wanted to start nursing. I knew I wanted to do something in the healthcare field. I really enjoyed helping others and felt like that was going to be a good fit for me. And in Chico, there was a big push for exercise physiology and kinesiology. One of my freshman roommates even was going the pre-physical therapy route. So got some insight to how that process started to look, and got my first observation hours in Butte Premier Physical Therapy, which, spoiler alert, that's where I met you. So got my volunteer hours there. I got to observe at an inpatient acute care facility in Chico as well, and started to realize that was probably the route I wanted to go. So
not that I influenced that or anything, 'cause, I may or may not have influenced how much you loved physical therapy, because for the listeners, I trained him on the job, had been around at that clinic for a little while as a physical therapy aide, and he started working there, and I trained him up. So I like to think that, I influenced your PT journey just a little bit.
I learned from the best for sure. So yeah, I got a job at Beat Premier, started to get paid as I learned about the profession, and went through to complete my undergraduate degree in exercise physiology, and started my journey towards physical therapy. As we started to connect towards the end of both of our years, we were both seniors. I graduated the winter before you, and we continued working together, and basically both started applying. You got into Northern Arizona University, and I was starting to apply just that year. So I knew I was going to be going back home for a little while. And fast forward, I worked for another year as an aide and finally got into my school of the University of St. Augustine, the San Marcos campus, which I loved. I got a great degree in physical therapy, learning a lot about orthopedics, hands-on treatment. They were great for the manual aspect of their schooling. And after graduation, bounced around through a couple of jobs till I found my current job, which has been a great private practice orthopedic clinic for me, and been practicing there for about a year and a half, total of 3 years out of school. And I guess that's my short story.
Yeah, very good. And so, because this is a podcast for former athletes, and we are both former athletes, I want to ask you a question I've been asking all my other guests, which is, what was it like for you transitioning from being an athlete to, I guess, life after sport? What was that like for you? And did you face any challenges along the way?
Yeah, so for me, um, from high school through athletics, I had a good background in exercise itself. Thankfully, I had the benefits of having access to a weight room through sport, and I had a smooth transition into going towards more of a weightlifting route after I finished with baseball. I started to dabble into rock climbing at the time, so it was trying to reach into different avenues that I could stay athletic, but work on things on my own because I didn't have a team to work with. I didn't have that structured practice. So I needed some way I could stay motivated and consistent on some sort of routine that felt like it fulfilled that kind of part of my life. Golf was another one that I've played since I was younger, and I began to pick that up a lot more. It's a great, difficult sport that I can go out to the range or go out and play a 18 hole by myself, or even better with you. So
Joe taught me how to play golf, and I am a very amateur golfer, but it's fun. I enjoy it. I've already hit a hole in one before Joe has, so
he's
I
doing
guess that
better than
makes
me.
I guess
I
that makes me pretty good.
again, I'm learning from the best. So those were ways that I could, I guess, fulfill my itch for athletic competition. For golf, it was a bit more of a competition with myself. Rock climbing, same thing. It was a competitiveness within the solving of the problems. If you're familiar with bouldering at all, they call them problems, and finding which way you're going to use your body to get up the wall. It was a great thing that for me, for an outlet, an athletic outlet. So beyond that, got into physical therapy, and I went into my waves of going in and out of consistent exercise or not. And I think it was about 3 years ago now, I picked up men's baseball. So got back on the field, which has been something I always missed when I finished my collegiate career. I always loved baseball and wanted to get back somehow. So I played 3 years now and still find that way to get that competitive drive and get connected with the sport itself. So
Yeah, and we're gonna talk about that a little bit more later too when we get into the rapid fire portion of this podcast. But yeah, okay. And I think something that I've reflected on personally, and I think you would probably agree, is that being a physical therapist, I feel like it's been nice as a career after being an athlete because you still get to be around physical activity and other athletes if that's the setting you like to go into, which is what both of us have liked and enjoyed working with athletes when they come into the clinic. And so I think that it's helped a lot to still feel like you have somewhat of a foot in the door in terms of like you're still involved in like physical activity and athletics at some level. Personally, I think I would have had a harder time if I went into a profession where I didn't get to move around. I didn't get to exercise. I didn't get to work with athletes or have any involvement in that at all. And so I think, at least from my perspective, that's made transitioning to life after sport a little bit easier.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Yeah, I think that's been super helpful for me too.
Yeah. Okay. So I feel like I need to have some like dramatic transition right now, but we're going to go into rapid fire questions. So, shout out to Catherine Ward for this idea, who I have had on the podcast recently. She did episode 8, I believe, on dietary considerations for runners. If you haven't checked out that episode, go check it out. But she thought it would be a good idea if, when I had Joe on the podcast, we did a little bit of this or that, or do's and don'ts of physical therapy, because while Joe and I do have some similarities in our philosophies and the way that we practice, we also have some differences and different opinions about different things. So without further ado, let's get started. Joe, are you ready?
Take a sip of water. Not sure how ready I am.
You should be scared because I can win. This is a game.
You always
Just
win.
see, he's trained already, and we're not even married. Nice job, babe. Okay, so the basic rules here are that ideally you're wrapping up the answer to each question in, a minute or two or less. Let's just say 2 minutes or less.
Okay.
Okay. So first question, what lights you up about the PT profession, physical therapy profession?
Seeing patients achieve their goals, seeing them motivated and driven to achieve something, whether it's to improve their physical health, to be consistent with something, to be able to do something they haven't done in a while, or return to an activity that they haven't gotten to do in a while. That really lights me up. I love helping others get to fulfill their journey and fulfill their goals. And I don't think anything else in the profession lights me up more than that.
Dang, can I say ditto? That's like I was gonna say something very similar, which is like, yeah, when people reach a certain goal or when they are able to do something they didn't think they would be able to do. So I agree. I want them to meet their goals and be proud of themselves. I think that's a really cool thing to see and be a part of when you empower someone with the tools to kind of take care of their own body and be able to reach their goals and get back to a desired activity and feel really good doing it. There's some sort of magic about that, about being a part of that process. But yeah, the instances where I'm really excited are where I kind of prove someone wrong, so to speak, about the way that their body can adapt and get stronger and overcome certain obstacles. I think that's a really cool thing. Okay, number 2. What frustrates you about the physical therapy profession?
Hmm. A cop out might say the notes. The notes frustrate me. Um, Insurance is another thing that frustrates me. I think the limitations that insurance places on us, or having someone who's not trained in healthcare and has not been on the front lines of dealing with people in pain, are making the decisions behind how we're going to be providing our care. I think our healthcare system is has its faults and could be structured better. Not necessarily my scope to say how, but I think right now there's a lot of limitations in how we're able to provide care, and individuals are paying for health insurance, and they hope to get this care that they know they deserve. And for that to be limited for some who can't afford better health care, and they're limited to 6 or 12 visits on this condition that's going to require a lot more effort and time. I think that's probably the biggest thing that frustrates me around our profession.
I think I'm just going to say ditto again. Okay, maybe we have more in common than we thought. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I mean, obviously, that's one of the big reasons why I started Fortitude, because I was kind of done with the whole insurance-based model and seeing that people could benefit from a whole lot more or a different kind of care where we have time to really individualize things and to really provide each person with what they need in a timeline that makes sense from a behavior change standpoint and also from a pain and injury recovery and healing time standpoint. and not being limited by insurance or the ability to continue. So I think that's a big one for me too. And then I also think it's a blessing and a curse, but something that does frustrate me is the sheer amount of variability in physical therapy from one clinic to the next and from one PT to the next. Again, I think it's good and bad, and it can be both, but I think sometimes having so much variability really confuses people because they can go to one provider and be told something and go to another provider and be told something completely different and have a completely different idea for how to help that person. And I think every provider wants to help the person in front of them, but I think I wish there was just a little bit more of a standardization of clinicians following clinical practice guidelines and following evidence a bit more so that we could be a bit more unified as a profession and confuse less people. I think that was longer than 2 minutes. Sorry. Okay. You ready for the next one?
I think so.
Okay. So, what is your favorite condition or painful body part to treat?
Can I say two
Sure.
really
Yeah,
quickly?
of
Okay.
course.
I enjoy the upper quarter, meaning mostly the neck and the shoulder. I enjoy the shoulder coming back from my background in baseball, treating specifically overhead athletes, tennis, volleyball, baseball, softball, or other sports that require your shoulder and you're trying to rehab the shoulder. I enjoy treating that. And I feel like with the neck, I'm comfortable with the neck. It's an area of vulnerability for many. It's a place where patients, clients can become very guarded and protective over. And I feel like I'm very comfortable with that body part. I'm able to identify ways I can help that individual, and I feel like I can gain good rapport and treat that area well. So I find comfort in treating both of those.
Yeah, this is easy because I am the exact opposite. So I would much rather prefer treating the low back, hip, and knee, and even in the ankle. But I would say if I had a favorite, it'd probably have to be the knee. I like treating the knee. It just makes sense. The joint makes sense to me. I really have always valued sports and the generation of power from the legs and from the ground up. And I've always really enjoyed leg exercises in the gym. I never skip leg day. But really, I think that there's a lot that starts from the ground up in terms of athletic endeavors, but also just day to day activities and recovery from injury and, management of pain in that area just clicks for my brain. So
That's why we're going to be good together in the future. You treat the lower half and I treat the upper half.
that's right. Yes. Yes. And together we treat the whole human. Okay, then of course, then we have to say what's your least favorite condition or painful body part to treat and why?
I might have to go with the lower back. Those you could treat all the lower backs and you can have them all. Um, I think because it's a body part that can often be unspecified. I like to have a little bit more direction in my clinical diagnosis and treatment. And I find I can do that a little bit better with the other body parts. Back, it's often ambiguous, not specifically related to a specific tissue and that. And then ankle, I enjoy treating the ankle. I think it's a complex body part for me. So those would be probably my top two least favorite. I
Hmm,
gave you two. I know you asked for one, but
that's okay. Yeah, that's okay. Yeah, this might sound like a cop out, but hand and wrist. I wrist, depending on what it is, if it's simple like a carpal tunnel or something. But there are so many small structures in the hand and it's just not a body part that I've ever enjoyed even learning about it. I was like, there's a lot to this, levers and pulleys and um, small tendons and ligaments and all the things. Capable of doing it, just not my favorite to treat. And so that is where OTs, our homies on the other side of the therapy spectrum, um, are the best with hands and wrists, and I will gladly refer a patient out to an OT for hand and wrist, or at least a physical therapist who is a hand specialist because they do specialize in that. And I think it's necessary. I think that's an area where it benefits you to see a hand specialist if you have a hand issue. Every PT can treat hand issues, but I think that personally, I would rather refer someone out.
I might have to agree with that too. So if I had to name three, but yeah, for those who are listening, having a certified hand therapist or an occupational therapist, they're gonna have just better repetitions with that body part. They're gonna have more options. Um, Sometimes you may be appropriate for wrist bracing and molds that they can provide and make for you. Unfortunately, in my area, there's not a lot of certified hand therapists. Um, just in our region, it's not a highly populated specialty, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So we could use more out there. So if there's any therapists out there listening and want to become a hand specialist, I'm sure that you would be used. Give us a call.
Yeah, absolutely. Let us know if you're in the Sacramento area and we will refer all of our hand people to you. I feel that way about pelvic health as well. I'm lucky enough to be in a clinic part-time where there are several pelvic health physical therapists. And I think that that's super helpful to have nearby for a referral source. So, anywho, we got off topic. Sorry, that this is not quite as rapid or fiery as I thought it was going to be, but ready to move on?
Yes.
Okay. What has been a painful body part or injury that you have had, and how have you managed it?
I've got a couple. I've had an ongoing hip thing going on that has been less problematic recently. My biggest problem or painful region has been my right shoulder. As I've told you before, I've played a lot of baseball. um, so into my high school career, I ended up having some posterior shoulder pain that had to go through PT, which was actually my first experience in PT. Um, but I think I had some maybe rotator cuff things go on. And as I got back into playing baseball, I've had some things started to pop back up, pitching more than my shoulder was capable of. So there was periods of the season that I would have to take rest from pitching and maybe play more infield. This past season, I did a little bit of prehab prior to the season, doing some shoulder, scapular, and rotator cuff strengthening exercises. I felt like I was pretty regular, about 3 times a week for that. And I prepared by getting into a throwing program. And it wasn't anything special. It was just simply trying to go out and throw a little bit more frequently before starting the season up and going right to it. So if anybody knows a thing about adult sports, we don't really have a preseason. So I would jump in, starting to throw 2 to 3 innings. I would quickly pick up to 4 or 5 innings. And if you see the face Tori's making right now, she knows that I would come home throwing way more than my shoulder was ready for, complaining about my shoulder for being in pain for a week or two, and get
That's
back and do the same
excruciating.
thing.
Excruciating to sit and listen to him every week come back and be like, God, my shoulder really hurts. It's like, gee, if only you knew what to do about this.
Yes, PTs can be great person to go to help with your issues. Helping their own issues, not so great at.
Yeah, we are good therapists. That doesn't mean we're good patients.
Yes.
There's a big difference.
So I started off really well this past season. I had my preseason. I started maybe 3 months in advance, doing some exercise, starting a gentle throwing program a couple times a week, and this past season felt a whole lot better. I didn't miss any time from a painful shoulder. I was able to throw longer games and more of them. I pitched better, so definitely something I'm going to try to continue with in my succeeding seasons. And yeah, I thought it was super helpful.
Mm.
Surprise, surprise.
Shocker. Yeah, wild how that happens. Um, but yeah, I think if we, as former athletes, we kind of think, oh, well, we can just pick it up where we left off, and we get competitive and we just show up and expect a lot out of ourselves. And that can get us into trouble, obviously. Not even just recreational sports, but in the gym or in any really competitive setting, I feel like. And I wanted to say too, a little caveat, like it's not like you didn't have any shoulder pain this last season. Like it's still something that you manage, right?
Oh yeah.
It's yeah, it's just that it's much better managed now. than it was in years previous. I think sometimes it's important to include that little nuance there in that story because I think a lot of people think, oh, well, if you're managing well, then you should have zero pain whatsoever. And oftentimes with these chronic issues that pop
Hmm.
up, they don't ever actually completely 100% go away when you're doing a certain level of sport. But if you can manage them appropriately and they're not limiting you, then that's a success, right?
Yeah, it was a big mindset shift in that I didn't have to just provide a preseason getting physically prepared, but I also went in the season with a better mental preparation of, hey, I'm going to go in with this many innings because I've thrown only this much and I need to build up. Also in the game, actively trying to throw not quite as hard as I used to. I can't throw it mid 80s like I used to. And so throwing as hard as I can isn't really going to give me that much of a benefit on the mound. Taking it back, allowing myself to throw more innings was actually what was better for me. And so that was a mental mindset shift throughout the season that I had to take on from game to game.
Yeah. And the beauty of that, like from as a bystander, was that like you were able to turn it on and like whip one in pretty hard when you needed to. Like I felt like you had more depth and more variety in your speed this year because you had the stamina in the shoulder to be able to do that. And before it was like you're just kind of running yourself into the ground. It just seemed like you have better control on the mound this year too.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so my turn. So I also have a couple things. Well, I have a few, I have more than a couple of things. I think that's another myth we need to dispel is that like just because you're a physical therapist doesn't mean you don't also have pains and aches and things that happen. I think that's like fairly obvious, but I guess I just wanted to bring light to that. So I would say, well, I deal with a bit of like chronic intermittent neck pain, and luckily I have a fiance who likes treating necks, so that works out in my favor. Um, but I think the more interesting one for the sake of the podcast is my ankles. So I'm pretty hypermobile, which means my joints are just pretty loose. I have a little bit more mobility in my joints, a little bit more laxity in my ligaments. So I have what you would call chronic ankle instability, and I've had frequent ankle sprains since the time I was young, and playing softball and basketball and cross country and all of those things. And so I had a more recent injury a few years back. I think that was 3 years ago now. Yeah, snowboarding, believe it or not. Yes, strapped into the boot. You can still hurt your ankle, especially if you are hypermobile. That set me back a bit. Never did get an MRI, never did get an X-ray. Would be interesting to see one. Um, but struggled with that left ankle for a while. So that was a big perspective shifting one for me. And I think that has definitely influenced how I treat as well and has given me some empathy for people who are dealing with longer term issues and things that are healing, but especially at the ankle, that kind of affects your mechanics all the way up the chain, when it comes to, your knee and then your hip and then your back. And so that's been a tough one for me, but I'm going over well over 2 minutes. So this, the ankles have been, I think, probably the biggest struggle of mine, but much, much better after 3 years of consistent training, um, and patience and grace. And it's been good. But yeah, I think it's been helpful at times to have Joe in my corner because structure is helpful. As we said before, we have all the knowledge in the world to be able to treat ourselves, and our achy body parts, which is a blessing. Don't get me wrong. I have thought on many occasions that I am so glad of our knowledge of anatomy and of our bodies and the healing times and how things work so that you can kind of ease some worries, but it's also, the follow through on that. It can be helpful to have a coach or a PT or a guide or someone who can give you a little structure and a little encouragement when you need it.
What's been, I know over the time, but what's been your most challenging or difficult part of your rehab or maintenance of your ankle?
I would say getting back to running was the hardest part because I thought that once I had built up enough strength, that it would be easier for me to go back to running. And running has been a consistent bugaboo in my training in that I would start running a little bit and then go, okay, I'm feeling good, and would kind of jump from, maybe a little bit of interval training of, what I call wogs to a little bit longer wogs. And I would end up, well, what I mean by longer wogs is longer run intervals, shorter walk intervals. And I would end up with more ankle pain. And then I'd have to back off for a couple weeks. And so it was hard for me to get consistent with that, with running. And it still is kind of hard to get consistent with that, but now it's for different reasons other than my ankle necessarily. Uh, and so I think the tapering myself back and allowing myself to go really slow back into running and back into continued strength training and lean in on other areas of fitness when running wasn't going so well. I think that was the hardest part, is just kind of restructuring my programming and what I'm used to doing, and also reprogramming my belief about what my body could do. Because there were months where I felt like, okay, maybe I'm not going to be able to ever run again. Like maybe this is just not something I'm going to be able to do. And so I think, again, I think this has really helped me become an even better therapist, because I can empathize with all of those thoughts and beliefs and feelings, and they are very real. And most of the time, if you give something long enough, you can get back to doing what you want to do. It's just about finding the pace that your body's ready for, and slowly but surely kind of smashing your own beliefs about your body, and figuring out what you're capable of. And that's something we talked about even on episode 8 with Catherine, as well, as she was talking about, don't put limits on yourself. She thought she might never run again either. And now she just ran a marathon and crushed it. So I think the body is this very strong, adaptable structure. Well, many structures. And we're capable of a lot more than we think. It just requires the right guidance and time and persistence.
Some things take a while.
Some things take a lot longer than we want them to. Like, we get very impatient as athletes, and we're like,
Yes. Why aren't I 21 again and moving and recovering after the first day or two?
Recovery is different. Different injuries, timelines are different, and we always want to compare ourselves to our previous selves, right? And also the peers around us. Like, they got Tom Brady back in whatever time or whatever. We're looking at professional sports, and I don't even know if Tom Brady had that big of an injury. I'm not.
He had an ACL, but we got Aaron Rodgers coming back from a complete Achilles tear, 90 days from injury, with some remarkable bridge surgery for his Achilles.
I still don't know how I feel about that.
Yeah, something I looked it up a little bit, but it's just I think the progresses in our surgical advances, and they're trying to find ways to get these high level athletes who are getting paid millions of dollars back on the field to do what they're getting paid for. It's not something that your run of the mill person's going to have access to. Immediate, optimal care provided at the exact moment they need it, as well as the time, the energy, and the care team that they can literally work on for their 40-hour a week plus 80-hour a week job of rehabbing to get back. I think it's new to us, and I'm interested to see how he goes. I think they've already said he won't be playing this season, so we won't get to see how he gets to play in that high level situation, having come back from it. But the fact that he's cleared to practice and he's running, it's pretty remarkable, and something I'm going to continue watching. And I think we'll start seeing more interesting advances in our surgical care, or even just our medical care for our athletes, and hopefully it goes in the right direction.
Yeah. I think a lot of PTs are on the edge of their seats, watching him right now and seeing how this goes. And I mean, I'm certainly very curious about what's going on, because it's not something we've seen before. It's not something I've seen before. And that is typically an injury that takes a year, really, before you're feeling, athletic again, because of the properties of tendons, but that tendon in particular and how strong and important that is. So Yeah, should be interesting to see. But that leads me into the last set of rapid fire questions kind of nicely. So, are you ready?
I think so.
What is the most underrated pain management or recovery strategy, in your opinion?
Oh, that's a good one. Um, can I say consistency?
Oh, okay. Tell
Um,
me more.
I think that we want that quick fix often. We want to see results now. I think time is often on our side if we could be patient enough. Sure, we want to find the right things to do, the best way to do it, but doing something regularly at the proper dose from what your physical therapist or coach has recommended, I think you're going to go a lot farther with that consistent steady pace than you are to try a bunch of different things over a short period of time. Just like you talked to some things take a lot longer. Rehabbing this ankle for 3 years. And I think doing things consistently over time, the body's adaptable. I think that is one of the most underrated things that I see in my field.
That's a good one. I didn't think of that one. But yeah, I mean, obviously that rings true for me and thinking about my injury and how persistence and consistency has been the goal. And I have fallen into the trap of going, okay, well, I'm not doing enough, so I have to do more. And usually that ended me up in more pain, in a place of a worse spot. And I think that it is true. Sometimes it's just consistently doing something over a long enough period of time instead of trying new things all the time. So yeah, good one. I would say most underrated pain management or recovery strategy. I'm gonna go with sleep and stress management because
Amen.
people grossly underestimate how important sleep and stress management is when it comes to pain in particular, but also just recovery and energy and all of the things without getting too deep into the sciencey stuff.
I think it's great. I think you got both sides of the spectrum where your rest is your rejuvenation. You're trying to heal and adapt and get stronger, whereas that persistent stress is a barrier to that. It's persistent cortisol levels that are affecting your body's ability to focus in the adaptation. Both of those are hugely important. I fully agree with you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think
Good ones.
like people think, well, oh, I'm not stressed. I'm not stressed. But it's funny because if you take a second and you actually like allow yourself to sit in a quiet room by yourself without anything to do, just watch what your mind does. Watch what your body does. Most people, because we're so used to this go, go, go mentality and world that we live in where productivity is king, I think most people are holding on to a lot more stress and tension than they realize, but we've been so conditioned to think that this is normal that we forget that we can hold a lot of stress and tension in the body. And what's that book? The body keeps the score. And so all of those things can turn up the dial on pain levels, because the nervous system is connected in with stress in your brain and all of that. So we can't get rid of stress. That's not the goal here. But being aware of how we're carrying stress and what we're doing to try to intentionally counteract stress and give ourselves some time to breathe is very important, and do meaningful activities that bring us joy and all that good stuff. And then, of course, yeah, sleep. I think that's pretty self explanatory. Okay, so then, of course, we have to go with what is the most overrated pain management or recovery strategy, in your opinion?
Oh,
Feel free to give a hot take here, Joe.
um, I think this is another area we might see eye to eye, but passive modalities might be a little overrated. And I think that as a whole, we're moving in a good direction where it's not as prevalent, but I think it's still pretty popular in most physical therapy settings. And for those who don't know, passive modality is something where we're providing a treatment to a body part that requires no action on the patient's behalf. We might see things such as ultrasound, deep tissue laser therapy, ice, electric stimulation. And not to say that these can't have a part in the rehab process. And I think they are a tool that we can utilize to help with patients getting better. But to have that as a primary or sole treatment is not the way to get our clients or their athletes or patients the best care that they need to get to the level that is, in my eyes, most appropriate. I think we need some active component where they're able to either utilize exercise to get stronger, build physical capacity, build tolerance to movement, train movements, things that are going to truly get the physical body better.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think, and you might be kind of surprised to hear this, that I've like my opinion on passive modalities has kind of like swayed back to the middle as of late because I think there's a time and place for passive modalities, and I know you agree with that. But for me, I see it in two different kind of categories. I see pain management in one category, and I see function in a different category. Oftentimes, pain affects function, and then a function is affected by pain. So I think that they go back and forth and they relate to each other. But I do think we can kind of separate them in terms of what physical therapists do. And the most important part to me about what physical therapists do is restore your function. And for many people, not just restore function, but improve function so that people are more capable of doing the things they want to do and that their body is healthier and better taken care of. Um, and so when it comes to, with the overrated pain management strategies, I agree. Like things like dry needling, things like massage or soft tissue work, things like cupping. Ultrasound is a huge one, mostly because we just don't have the evidence behind ultrasound at all. And it really should not be in PT clinics anymore. But you name the passive modality, and it's probably a little bit overhyped in terms of what it does. Now, does that mean it doesn't help you? Absolutely not. Like, I do think, again, there's a time and place for those things. There's a time and place for soft tissue, for, acupuncture, for dry needling, for cupping, for scraping, whatever it is. Like, if you find a benefit from that and you find pain relief in that, I don't necessarily see the harm in doing it as long as you are informed about what it's actually doing to your body. And I think we still have a lot of outdated narratives that are not scientific around what it's actually doing to you and how it's affecting your pain. And so I think if we are aware that, yes, this is a short-term pain relief strategy and this can be really helpful right now and useful right now, but it's not the long-term solution to your pain or to improving your function, then I think there's a time and place and it's perfectly appropriate to use it. I think that's the nuance, at least for me.
Yeah, well said. I do think there's a time and place for this. I use it a lot in my clinic. I like how you separated out to pain management versus function, because oftentimes we might see a very acute patient who can't tolerate a lot of movement.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the best thing is to massage their body part, is to ice it down, provide something that allows them to decrease that pain sensitivity to then do more.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's always important to come back to that function. Why are we doing this? Get this pain down, get them moving more, get them to their goals.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's really well said.
Yeah. And I think when, like you said, when it's targeted towards, okay, what's the ultimate goal of this? A lot of people come in and they say, I want less pain or I want no pain. And wholeheartedly, we're like, yeah, we want that for you too. Pain sucks, right? But I think at the end, it's like, okay, you want less pain or no pain so that you can do what? And usually, when we can get to the root of that answer, then we have what we're going for in terms of improving your function and getting you less pain so that you can do X, Y, or Z. But yeah, I think that some of those things are a little bit frustrating because they've been sold as like the panacea of this is what's going to quote unquote fix you. And it kind of falls back on that like fixer mentality. Where you and I know you agree, prefer to put the power in the hands of the patient or the person in front of us. Say, like, look, you have the skills to work on this. I'm going to help you and I'm going to guide you. And of course, as they say, who said that first? Was it maybe it was Greg Lehman? Calm shit down and build shit back up. That's kind of what we do in a nutshell as physical therapists is like at some point, like if you're having so much pain it's limiting your function, like yeah, we gotta get some stuff on board to get your pain down, gotta calm it down, and then we build you back up. So I think it's needed and necessary, but I think it's just, there's some nuance there that's important to uncover. So
Mhm.
anything else on that?
I don't want to go too deep in it, but I think it's important for listeners to understand the complexities that come around pain. I think a lot of patients that I see, they are homebound and they live with this pain, and it's easy to perseverate on it day to day and hour to hour. And when it comes back to function, when it comes back to these goals of people wanting to get back to something, it really helps the process of finding a way to move beyond that pain symptom. Again, not getting too deep into how pain works, but it's so factorial. It's very complex, and having that internal drive to get from A to B, whatever that point B is, that goal of theirs, is important to have. That's why you'll hear your coach, you'll hear your physical therapist asking you at your initial session, what do you want to get back to doing, or ask you your goals, and so just add that to what you said.
Yeah, I think it's helpful to have, a motivator behind what you're doing for sure. For former athletes, I wanted to go back to that last rapid fire question real quick before we wrap things up, because there was one that I had written down that I thought of the most overrated pain management and recovery strategy for athletes, hands down for me, is stretching. Like, the amount of times I've heard from athletes, and it's because we're coached into it, right? Like, this is our lives. Like, this is what we're told. You need to stretch more. You're tight because you don't stretch enough, or you're hurting because you don't stretch enough, or you're sore, so you should stretch. And people come to physical therapy wanting stretches, like that's like the most common type of movement that people know about. And so I think that it's important to say, like, yes, there's a time and place for stretching. Sure, it can feel really nice. But I think we've been oversold the idea that stretching is like the solution to all of your aches and pains, because it's just not. Nothing is, by the way. There is no one solution to all your aches and pains. It is much more complicated than that. But I just want to appease some of the maybe people listening that are like, I need to stretch more. I know I don't stretch enough. You're probably okay. You probably don't need to stretch more and you're doing fine.
Yes, we're often working humans, so we only have so much time in the day and the week to do something. I personally have my own stretch routine, but that's because that's how I grew up. It's something that's been implemented in the sport, and it's something I don't mind spending 5 to 7 minutes at most before my workouts doing, because it mentally prepares me. Sometimes it helps with my hip mobility personally. But if there's 30 minutes in the day, you have that time to do something. It's okay if you don't stretch. It's okay to go right into the workout. It's not going to be the end of the world.
Yeah, we could talk probably a full hour on this, but like there is more nuance behind that. Like there's a difference between a static stretch and a dynamic stretch. And there's a difference between like quote unquote mobility work and stretching and static stretching. And I think there is room for all of that, right? Like none of it's bad. We could go into what the research says about like static stretching before a workout versus after, and that like it's more ideal to static stretch after a workout or after something if you're looking for performance, and that it does not provide any necessarily extra benefit in terms of injury risk reduction to do static stretching before a workout, standing there stretching your quads for a minute. But I do think there's a benefit to warming up. I do think there's a benefit to mobility work, but I think there's this idea that like stretching is the thing you need to be doing more of and you'd have less injuries or you'd feel better. Um, if you have a ritual of stretching and that feels really good and that's something that enriches your life in one way or another and makes you feel more mobile and capable of doing X, Y, or Z, then by all means go for it, right? But I think again, putting the ball back in your court in terms of autonomy and doing what you value. If you value stretching, hell yeah, go for it. But if you don't worry about it. You're probably not missing out on too much. You look tired. I think I've talked your ear off. Um, okay, so let's wrap this up. So, Joe, is there anything else that you want people to know? Any former athletes listening, or something you've been thinking about lately in regards to physical therapy or health in general?
Yeah, I think I'll give Catherine Ward one more shout out on this show. 'Cause she deserves it. My most recent goal is to run a half marathon. So I mentally committed actually after Catherine Ward ran her marathon, and it's something I've never done before. I'm not typically a big runner or a long distance runner, but I've always had the interest in keeping up with it. And so I guess the moral of the story is having personal goals is super, super important. As we've talked about it a little bit on this podcast, as we've talked about consistency, I think having your own personal goals is what's going to help maintain your motivation and consistency for the long term. And goals will change. You may not get to your goals, and that's totally okay. Um, the most important thing for me is that I'm going to be living this long life filled with physical activity that's going to keep me physically healthy so that I can play with my future kids, run with my dogs, go exercise with you, carry the groceries up the stairs, whatever it may be.
This is why
That
we train.
this is why we train. But just a little bit more about me. I had a lifting goal that I was going to reach the 1,000 pound club in all of my power lifts, and I didn't achieve that goal. I went for a while and felt like I was starting to plateau in my major lifts. Life happened, and I fell off in consistency, and I'm only working out a few days a week and working more total body versus separating my muscle groups because that's what I have the time for. Um, but changing my goals so that for the next 6 months I have something to work towards. And hey, if I decide to quit or fall off, that'll be okay for me. But right now, I think that's something that's super motivating for me, and I have something to look forward to that's going to keep me interested and ready to go week after week. So just want to encourage those out there. Try to find something, whether it's small or big. If you want to do an event, if you want to reach a certain number on the weights, if you want to try a new task that you haven't done before, find something small. And if you want an accountability buddy.
I did that to you. I'm so sorry. Emma Jack, if you're listening, that's a shout out to your podcast with your sister. They say accountability buddy. And I told Joe that, and now that's in his brain. That's his earworm. Sorry.
Yeah. Just someone to keep you there. Sometimes it's easy to get lost in the whole thick of things.
Lost in the
But having
sauce.
lost in the sauce, as they say, um, someone can help remind you kind of what you're working for, and yeah, go out and set some goals, achieve those goals, kick butt.
I love that. Yeah, and I think as athletes and former athletes, we can all identify with that it feels like there's more purpose and intention behind exercise when you have a goal in mind. But the other thing you said there is that it's okay to change goals or to not get there and then like shift. I think as athletes, again, we want to commit to something. And it's actually very healthy to decide when something's no longer serving you or decide when life is taking you in a different direction and to kind of shift gears to something new. So thanks for bringing that up. I think that's great. And I don't know, maybe I already told you this before we started recording, but that my last question was actually asking if you have any goals or resolutions for
Oh,
2024.
yeah.
So I love that you already went there. Um, Anything else that you are looking forward to in 2024?
Ooh, yes, I have one very important day coming up in 2024. I cannot wait to marry my best friend. But
I teed that up for you.
yes, you did.
That was a test and you
It was
passed. Good job,
intentional.
babe.
So half marathon wedding, trying to make sure you don't bite my head off through all the crazy hecticness of the wedding planning.
I will be an angel as I always am.
She has been great, but I anticipate some more stressful days to come. But we are planning, hopefully, fingers crossed, to hike Half Dome on our little mini moon after our wedding. So that's another physical goal of ours. And fingers crossed because we got to get a permit and be a part of the lottery system to go. But that'll be something to look forward to and get in shape for.
Hmm. I agree. That was going to be mine. I'm excited. I hope we get to hike Half Dome. That would be a really special thing. But even if we don't do it this time, we will do it eventually. That is on bucket list of things for sure. So, all right. Well, thanks for being here again. Thanks for allowing me to force you to be here. And I love you. And let's wrap this up. So, if people want to connect with you, where can they find you?
Yeah. Anybody's welcome to add me on Instagram. I'm a little less active than Tori is, but I'm still there. Um, anybody's welcome to email me, and those are the two best places.
Yeah, he's like a more private Instagram. So, yeah, it's not like you're going to get a lot of PT content or anything like that from his necessarily, but cool. All right. Well, that has been another episode of Finding Fortitude. If you liked this episode and you want to hear more like it, please go ahead and like, subscribe, leave us a review down below. And I am excited for the next one. Again, Happy New Year, and I'll see you again soon. This has been the PT Power Couple signing out.
Thanks for having me. I'll see you all next year.
Yeah, see? It wasn't so bad, was it? You can say, I love you too.
I love you too. There we go.